I'm mad at myself over this one because I just sat there and watched it happen. I have made so many mistakes in my time as a plant parent. I am so far from perfect, but one thing I always like to express on here is like the realistic side of the plant collecting journey, the good and the bad. And I think making mistakes is an important thing to do when you're learning things. And so today I am sharing some mistakes that I have made in my plant collecting journey and essentially airing out my own dirty laundry in hopes that we can all maybe learn from my mistakes and I can maybe not make them again. Hopefully. So grab yourself a drink, a snack, sit back and relax, and we can go through these mistakes that I have made. Before we do though, I want to say if you're new here and you don't know me already, hi, my name is Emma and I make houseplanty content all over the internet. So if you want to follow along with my houseplanty journey and maybe learn something along the way, stick around, watch more of my videos, and subscribe to my channel. If you are not new here, welcome back. I really appreciate it. One more thing before we get into it. This video is sponsored by Willow, who I'll talk about a little bit later on. The first one was a really big one that destroyed an entire chunk of my collection. It was my issue with root mealies. So a few years back, I was getting really into collecting cacti and succulents, trying my hand at a whole different kind of growing. As you can see, I mostly grow like tropical foliagey houseplants, and cacti and succulents were something that I was trying to get into. And I just got a whole bunch at once and I didn't check them for pests or anything. They all looked pretty good. Nothing had any big issues. What I didn't see was that under the surface in one of the plants, I have no idea which one to this day, but it ended up affecting a lot of plants in my cacti and succulent collection, were root mealies. They were hidden underneath the soil, slowly going after the roots of some of my cacti and succulents. And so my first mistake was not seeing them off the bat. This was before I was regularly repotting new plants that came into my collection right away. I didn't do that. And so these root mealies went unnoticed for quite a long time. And on top of that, I was watering a lot of my cacti and succulents collectively at that time. I had a lot of them sitting in a single like baking tray, and I would just kind of pour water over the top and let them sit in that for a little bit, soak up, and then pour the excess out. And that seemed like a great idea at the time, but I'm pretty sure it was slowly spreading the mealie bugs throughout my cactus collection and slowly infesting them all. And it got to the point where I would notice so many of my cacti and succulents going downhill fast because the root mealie issue got so big without me knowing that it was absolutely disgusting. It was so gross. The first time I found them on a plant was probably maybe like a year or more after I had gotten that specific one. And so they had just been festering in there because none of my other plants had ever had root mealies, ever. And somehow they were just all up in my cacti and succulents in so many different ones. And I tried to treat them. I tried to treat them with bug clear and with hydrogen peroxide and with so many different things. But it just got to the point where I was so fed up with them and my collection. A lot of my cacti and succulents kicked the bucket because the roots were just so far gone because the root mealies were just like eating them up, that I ended up throwing away a good chunk of that collection and parting ways with others, which I'm pretty sure were clear. I had treated them to high hell, but I was just so over my cacti and succulents at that point that I was just like, nah, I don't need to deal with these pests. Since then, I have started repotting pretty much all of my plants as soon as they come into my collection, and I have found that's a great way to check the roots for pests before they get added into things, as well as like for root rot and like giving them new soil and whatnot as well. So that's my lesson. Check your plants right when you get them. Check the soil, check the roots, check all of the stuff. Because if not, it could cause major problems down the line. For this next mistake, I think I have a little bit of a problem with out of sight, out of mind with my plants. If things are pushed to the back, or they're in an out of reach place, or they're behind in a box, I just kind of forget about them a little bit, and that's what happened with several of my prop boxes. Some for over a year. I have had so many issues with prop boxes and just like leaving them. For a while, I started labeling things in hopes that it would get me to like at least know what the plant was. And when I originally put it in the box, the final straw with me in prop boxes was when I had a big prop box full of begonia rexes, and I never ever opened that thing. I think I just didn't care about the cuttings enough. Maybe that was part of the issue, but I never opened that thing. I didn't water it. I didn't check on it all that often. And what ended up happening was the whole thing dried out and I was left with a box of dead plants just sitting in my home for who knows how long. I don't know, because I wasn't looking at it. And that kind of prompted me to stop doing prop boxes pretty much altogether, because I just now know this about myself, that it's not something that I am paying attention to enough for me to have the like propagations actually survive and thrive. So now I know that if I want to propagate something, which these days I'm not doing tons of because I'm not trying to add loads to my collection, but if I want to propagate something, I need to do it in plain sight. Otherwise it will get forgotten and potentially die. I suppose in a somewhat similar vein, because it has to do with forgetting things in moss, is not watering my moss poles as frequently as I should. And this has been something that I've struggled with a lot over the years and with moss poles, because moss does dry out so much faster than soil, than semi-hydro. It just gets dehydrated quite quickly, and once it's dehydrated, it gets hydrophobic and it's harder to get to rewater. And it is just something I've generally struggled with over my time, but I recently had it really bad where I nearly lost my entire Cebu Blue, which is one of my absolute favorite plants and one that I've been actively trying to work on and like get to fenestrate for several years now. Basically, I just didn't water the pole for a really long time, and previously that has been annoying but not a huge issue for a lot of my plants on moss poles where I've let them dry out too much. But with my Cebu Blue, I slowly watched it drop leaf after leaf after leaf, go so yellow, watch all of the vines pretty much wrinkle and shrivel up and basically die in front of my eyes while I did nothing about it. I'm mad at myself over this one because I just sat there and watched it happen over the course of about a month, and I know that is bad. I should have done something as soon as I saw the signs that something was going amiss. I should have been watering it loads throughout this time. I say this every single time. I'm watering all the time now, like twice a week. I am back on top of it, and I'm really lucky that I was able to save the top portion on the pole, because the entire bottom 2/3 of this dropped so many leaves that it was pretty much unsavable. The roots in the pole had dried out too much, and even if I had tried to water the pole at that point, they wouldn't have been able to suck up water because they were so dry and dead that it would not have helped. So I had to do a whole reset with that one. Luckily, I was able to keep the top portion and keep that on a pole, and I was able to take a couple of cuttings, not loads. I did have to take some from my hanging one to try and put in the bottom as well. I did that recently, but it was a bad time, and it was entirely my own fault on that one. Like, I have literally no one else to blame but myself, but it's hard when it's one of your favorite plants. But I think I was just so overwhelmed and so like busy with other stuff going on in my life that it wasn't a priority to like water the pole and or deal with the problem once I started like seeing it go downhill. I'm gonna hold my hands up and say that one was entirely my fault. But I still regret those actions to this day, and I'm kind of mad at myself for letting it get that far. I think now's a good time to talk about Willow and their smart plant sensors, these lovely things right here. I like to put these sensors in plants that I otherwise sometimes forget about watering wise. I currently have one in my euphorbia, which helps me remember to water that one because it's not nearly as frequent as the other plants I have in my collection. I also like having them in plants that I'm still learning to take care of, like my spider plant, which I've been keeping alive for over 6 months now, and I'm really proud of myself because I've I've never been able to keep one alive before, and I think a huge part of that is to do with the willow plant sensor. These really help me keep on track watering wise because they sit in your plant soil and give you notifications when it's time to water, but they also help with plant placement because they're also measuring light, temperature, and humidity all the time, so they really help me pick the right spots for the plants that I have them in. So if you want some help avoiding making mistakes with your plants, grab yourself some willow plant sensors today. You can use my link in the description for 10% off. Your plants will absolutely thank you. The next mistake I've made was keeping plants out of guilt to the point where some of them just ended up dying. Oops. I used to do this a lot more when I had a bigger collection because it wasn't as manageable to me. I have since downsized quite a lot. I used to have over 250 plants in my collection. Now I think I've got just over 100, so I've reduced a whole heck of a lot. But when my collection was at its highest, I found that I was just keeping plants out of the idea that having a lot of plants was the right thing to do for a plant tea content creator. And I don't think that was a good mindset to be in, because there are several plants that I had that I just watched go downhill slowly, and I didn't care enough about them to actually do anything. I didn't care enough to repot them or dust their leaves or make sure that they were in the right space. They were kind of just there for the sake of being there. That was not the right thing to do. I really wish I had gotten into a better mindset earlier on, or had at least accepted my lack of love for the plants sooner. Then I could have rehomed them before they got to a point at which they weren't really rehomable. A lot of them got to that point where you could buy a nice one for cheaper than it would cost for me to post the plant to someone. And so at that point, what's the point? Why was I holding on to this thing just for the sake of it? The answer is I don't know. I think it was a sense of duty, guilt, or need to come off as this person with hundreds and hundreds of plants in my collection because I make videos about them, and I really wish I hadn't done that. And I think a lot of plants really suffered for me during that period of time because I was also going through heavy plant burnout because I had too many things to look after, and so the ones that I didn't love just got pushed and pushed and pushed into the point where they just weren't livable anymore, and in some cases actually died. Which is just sad. I am so I really hate that I let myself get to that point with several plants in my collection, and it's something that I have been working on really hard since. Once I've noticed myself falling out of love with a plant, I have tried to rehome it sooner rather than later, whether that's giving it away for free or selling it to one of my patrons or one of you out there. I've been trying to do that before it gets to the point where the plant just isn't rehomable, if that makes sense. My next mistake was in fertilizing my pinguiculas. And a lot of you are probably screaming at the screen, or were screaming at the screen watching me fertilize my pinguiculas, because basically my rationale for this was I didn't have loads of fungus gnats flying around at the time, which is a great problem to have. There wasn't really enough food for my pinguiculas, and so I was a little bit worried that they weren't getting fed enough, and so they wouldn't have enough nutrition to feed themselves. So I was like, you know what, I can try and feed them. And so I did a bunch of research and I looked online and I saw that you can feed your pinguiculas high protein fish food. And so I got myself some high protein fish food, mixed up a little slurry, dropped it onto the leaves of the plant. Essentially how I thought I had seen other people do it. I immediately burned these pings. I regret this so much because every single place where I put a bit of the fertilizer was a little burn mark, and I had to get rid of all of those leaves and not quite start the pings over because they were still salvageable. I just had to take some leaves off, but I thoroughly regret doing that, and I really wish I hadn't. I should have just let them be, because you don't need to do that with pinguiculas. You do not need to feed them. Maybe you do. I still don't know. I don't think I will ever feed them again, at least in that way. I might be tempted to put some fertilizer in the soil instead. I don't know. A lot of people told me that I didn't need to do it. Some people said they have done similar things. I'm still curious to know what you would do in this situation. If you don't have enough things for your carnivorous plants to eat, if you don't have enough bugs, what do you do? Do you just leave them and let them be? Like, are they still fine? I think mine were fine at the time as well. They might have gone dormant as well, because this was over winter, so like maybe that was part of the issue, as they were dormant and I tried to feed them when they were dormant, which they absolutely do not need. But I think it's put me off of fertilizing them entirely now, and I don't think I will try to fertilize my pinguiculas again. I don't think. I'm never gonna say never, because like things change and maybe I will learn better, and I'll definitely not do it in the same way I did before. That is for certain, because that way it did not work for me for a myriad of reasons, I think. And so I regret making the decision to fertilize them, and we can just move past it, move on. This next mistake I am currently in the process of making right this second. And it is letting the leaves of my plants touch grow lights and getting burns. Sometimes this has happened to me as an accident, like Joe's desk goes up and down and there's plants on his desk, and sometimes if his desk is standing and the grow lights turn on, they're physically touching the grow lights and those leaves get burnt, and that's an accident, that's fine. But it more often happens to me when my plants are in my cabinet or on like low shelves, where my plant leaves are physically touching the grow lights and I just end up leaving them. Like, I am 100% certain right now that there is at least one anthurium in my cabinet whose leaf is physically touching the grow light. Why am I not doing anything about this? Like, what is wrong with me? All I need to do is like shift it over slightly, I'm sure, and it will be fine. But instead I've just like let it get burnt and I'm just leaving it, and it's just, why do I do this? Maybe it's just a plant that I'm not as like, it's not that I don't care about it as much, but like I'm not as like protective over it as some of my other things, because I'm sure there are plants in my collection that if they started touching a grow light, I would be like, absolutely freaking not. Like the ones that I have on Joe's desk, the allocated tigrina that got burnt, I was very, very sad about that. As soon as I noticed that the leaf was touching, I put the desk down and pulled it away from the grow light. But I suppose there's just some that, I don't know. It's just a really weird one. I think maybe it's a sign for me that I should probably not have that plant anymore or rehome it or something, because if I don't care enough to move the plant out of the way of the grow lights, then I must not care enough about it to like care if it survives or does well. So maybe that's a sign for me that I need to do a bit of another purge sometime. Yeah, I feel bad about that one currently. And then the final mistake was one that I've made also quite recently. It's to do with my variegated Paulownia repens, which is no longer with us, RIP. Sad. The mistake I made with this one is repotting it just before I went away on holiday for 3 weeks. And I don't know if it necessarily needed a repot. Paulownia in general tend to have really small root systems, and so it was definitely too big for the pot it was in. It was drying out quite quickly, and so that was a little bit of a problem. So it did need the repot, but it probably didn't need it right that second. I probably could have held off on it until after I came back from holiday, because essentially I repotted it and then I went away, and for some plants that would be absolutely fine, but for Paulownia, whose roots are very thin and spindly, I think it might have been a little bit too much stress on the plant, and it would have been fine if I were here to watch the plant like and take notice if something were to happen. Like right when I noticed it starting to like fade down, I could have done something and maybe taken loads and loads of cuttings, or like gave it another repot and checked on the roots, really been able to like adjust and fix the problem as and when. But since I repotted it and then pretty soon after went away, I was not able to monitor it for signs of stress, and I wasn't able to do anything to like mitigate the problem before it became an issue. And when I got home from 3 weeks away, this thing was wilted AF. It was so like down. It looked as if it hadn't been watered in weeks, and that was not the case because it still had water in its reservoir. I had topped it up again once I got back. It just didn't perk up, unfortunately, and it got to the point where there was maybe 1 or 2 cuttings that were potentially savable, but for the most part, it just pulled out. The roots were entirely rotten, and a lot of the stems had gotten so far ruined that it just wasn't worth me saving, because I liked having a nice big bushy version of the plant, and I mean, I could go get another and I could replace it, but that's not the point. I liked having the big bushy version, and so having one with just like 1 or 2 vines isn't really the kind of vibe that I was going for with that one. And so it just ended up going in the bin, and that kind of sucked and was frustrating. But again, maybe down the line I can get another one. It doesn't need to be right now. I have plenty of time and I can try again in the future. But that was one that definitely made me sad. And so if I were to learn from it, don't repot things right before I go away. And that's something I know. I am very well aware that I shouldn't do these things. I think I just got a bit complacent and I trusted the process a little bit too much when I shouldn't have. So there we go. That is my final mistake. I hope you enjoyed hearing about my plant mistakes and have maybe learned from me in these situations about like what not to do. Fingers crossed you have, because I don't want you to necessarily make any of these mistakes. I'd be really curious to hear, and it would help me feel less alone if you told me about some plant mistakes that you have made. Totally okay if you don't want to relive that trauma. That's also perfectly fair and valid. But yeah, it might make me feel a little bit less alone. So pop your biggest plant mistake down below in the comments. But again, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up down below and leave a comment on other planty things you'd like me to talk about in the future, and subscribe for more. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next one. Don't forget to keep growing. Bye!